A week and a half ago, Governor Inslee called and said, I would like to have a climate-only debate. And I said what I just said to you, Governor, we are going to have a more robust and granular discussion of climate in the course of our debate season than ever before. And I understand why Governor Inslee wants to do this, and I understand the importance of the issue. But to change the rules now and say we're going to do it differently after we had all agreed on the terms of engagement, then I need to go back to a number of organizations who said, I want a debate on my issue and my issue only. And we don't have enough debates to do that.
We're here to say to our politicians, we need you.
This is not about Republican. This is not about Democrat. This is about humanity. We are now fighting for existence.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are illegally demonstrating what's in the God's mouth. This is your second warning. You now look to be arrested. This is your second warning.
Most discussion of climate has focused on carbon emissions. But what if a much bigger story has been missing? What if there are additional and colossal natural forces on this planet being triggered into action by these emissions? Forces with the power to amplify climate change to a point where it can threaten the very existence of life itself. Some call this the ranting of hysterical environmentalists, but the highest level of science is now saying we are approaching such a point. Watch this program, look at the evidence, decide for yourself, and be forewarned. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, is an international network of thousands of climate scientists drawn from over 100 countries. For its reports, hundreds of studies are subjected to expert peer review. As its final reports are released to the public only after consensus is gained from all the participating countries, its language is usually quite conservative, understating rather than overstating the issues. Yet its most recent report, released in 2018, used unusually strong words in giving the most severe warning to humanity since it was established in 1988. A landmark report from the United Nations Scientific Panel on Climate Change paints a far more dire picture of the immediate consequences of climate change than previously thought. A world of worsening food shortages and wildfires, and a mass die-off of coral reefs as soon as 2040, a period well within the lifetime of much of the global population. Two very key findings in this report are on the topics of permafrost and methane. Here's what's said in the official summary for policymakers about how rapidly the permafrost is thawing. The IPCC report says, on the order of decades. Here's what it says about the release of methane. Though this wake-up call issued to humanity by the world's scientific community is certainly alarming enough, the requirement for consensus among all nations means that these reports are usually several years behind those who push on the cutting edge of climate science. What those on this leading edge now see presents a cause for even deeper alarm.
Given these challenges, it's important that the nation have someplace it can turn to for authoritative, unbiased, scientific advice from experts who only speak the truth based on uncompromising evidence. The mission of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine is to do that for the nation.
On August 6th, 2018, an unprecedented and cutting-edge report was released by the National Academy of Sciences in the U.S. It states that within this century, several tipping points may merge together to cause the planet to slide into a hothouse Earth pattern, with temperatures eventually becoming so high that human civilization could be reduced to a brutal struggle for survival.
Start to trigger these feedback processes, they act like a cascade, like knocking down a row of dominoes. And once they start tipping and falling, we can't stop them. That would take us to a much different climate, a much warmer climate, a much more difficult climate for humans to live in. If we go to a 3 or 4 degree temperature rise, which is where our current level of ambition, or current level of policy around the world would take us, I think there's actually a high probability that we would have crossed that threshold and be on the pathway to hothouse Earth.
To clarify, this report is not saying that life on Earth is coming to an end within this century. But it is saying that a series of chain reactions or feedbacks can be set in motion which lead to a dramatic escalation of global heating to a point where the survival of humanity will indeed be threatened. And that once this process is started, it will no longer be within the power of humanity to stop it. Another example is methane, a greenhouse gas that is stunningly 86 times more powerful than carbon dioxide within the first 20 years of its emission. As warming releases methane from formerly frozen ground or seabeds, it warms the region still further and releases even more methane, thus becoming a self-perpetuating feedback. Permafrost thawing in the Arctic. This layer of frozen soil was given such a name because scientists thought it would stay that way throughout the year. But now it is melting. What's the big deal? These scenes do not appear to represent something with the power to topple the world order of human society, but they do. Of all the tipping points mentioned in this report, none are of more central importance and more immediately frightening than the thawing of permafrost and the massive quantity of additional and highly potent greenhouse gases that will be emitted and then added together with those already being generated by human activity.
Over hundreds of millennia, Arctic permafrost soils have accumulated vast stores of organic carbon, an estimated 1,400 to 1,850 billion metric tons of it. That's about half of all the estimated organic carbon stored in Earth's soils. In comparison, about 350 billion metric tons of carbon have been emitted from all fossil-fueled combustion and human activity since 1850.
This translates to at least 4 times as much greenhouse gas as has been produced by all of humanity since the beginning of the industrial age. It is little wonder that scientists call this the sleeping giant of extreme climate disruption.
There's a ticking bomb in this vast remote land, with vast amounts of highly flammable methane seeping from the earth below. More greenhouse gas than man has made since the Industrial Revolution, some 500 billion tons.
Permafrost, it's so huge bomb. If it will melt only 100 years, it will be catastrophic for climate, for global agriculture.
U.S. scientists are taking notice. Adam Wolf, a Princeton biologist who's worked in Siberia, says the rise in temperature from such an explosive release of carbon would threaten the planet.
There's a tremendous amount of carbon in the frozen tundra in Russia, in Canada, and other places. As the Earth warms up, the microbes in that tundra will begin to wake up, and they will begin to chew on this carbon in the form of dead vegetation and reprocess it in the form of carbon dioxide and methane. Once they begin to do that, scientists say that there will be a release of greenhouse gases that will actually create a runaway effect. And by that I mean that they begin to release more carbon dioxide and methane, it goes up into the atmosphere, there's more greenhouse gases, that warms the Earth up still more, and it creates a runaway effect. So much so that there is a reasonable probability that once this starts, the amount of greenhouse gases released could then be larger than, it can even dwarf the amount of greenhouse gases that humans are putting in the air now. And at that point, it's completely out of our control in the sense that even if the humans stopped emitting more greenhouse gases, the release of the trapped carbon material in the tundra just runs away. We don't know exactly what temperature this is going to occur, but as we go to warmer and warmer temperatures, 4, 5, 6 degrees centigrade, many scientists are feeling that this may really kick in. We cannot go there.
We have at least theoretical control on emissions from human activities, and because of that, we feel like we can do something to change it if it will be necessary. In case of thawing permafrost, there is no way to control it or to stop it. It just will go by itself.
This program has explored the permafrost tipping point in depth. But this key report is warning about what is called a cascade of feedbacks. It describes how one domino can tip, which in turn topples another one, and then another. This graphic illustrates the many elements that could well converge. Included are dramatic loss of forests, both tropical and far north, that are presently drawing carbon out of the atmosphere. Loss of both the Greenland and Arctic ice sheets. Collapse of glaciers in regions dependent on their water for irrigation.
Every third person on the planet depends on these water reserves. 500 million people are completely dependent on the Ganges. They use it for drinking water, and they grow their crops in the fertile fields by the river.
Conscientious people have marched and rallied to rein in carbon emissions. But much of this concern has been directed at human-generated carbon emissions related to coal power plants and oil pipelines. The greatest threat now is that human-generated carbon emissions will act as the trigger to unleash already existing and tremendously huge natural forces which can vastly accelerate climate disruption and push it beyond human control far more quickly than originally anticipated. Due to the domino effect caused by converging tipping points and the crossover into the unstoppable hothouse Earth condition, the timeline of a century or two has suddenly been reduced to only decades. In terms of triggering the irreversible chain reaction, the sand in the hourglass may now run out as soon as the middle of this present century. This is the critically needed paradigm shift. As the dominoes fall, science is warning us that global heating can escalate to a level where human life will degrade, enter into a brutal struggle for survival, force mass migration involving millions of refugees, and induce levels of strife that can collapse the institution of government itself. Regions of the Earth may well be rendered uninhabitable. The implications are stark. At this point, we seem to reach the very edge of what the human mind can comprehend. Once these massive forces of nature are activated, they will be governed only by the implacable laws of physics. These physical processes do not have a heart. They have no feeling. They will grind on, quite oblivious to humanity clinging to survive. The question is how far this process will go. Will temperatures continue to soar to the point where our Earth is transformed into a hellish wasteland? A hothouse Earth, stressing life support systems to their breaking point?
The Earth has experienced dramatic loss of life, or what we call mass extinctions, 5 times over the course of geologic history. And the largest and most devastating of all was the Permian mass extinction. 95% of all life on the planet was dead.
I think it is certainly extremely significant that a lot of the main crises of the past are associated with global warming, and so with obvious implications for the present day.
During the Permian mass extinction, greenhouse gases were released by volcanic eruptions in an area that is today called the Siberian Traps.
Of course, looking at these ancient events shows us times of global warming, and the atmosphere doesn't care whether the carbon dioxide comes from human activity or from a volcano. It has the same end effects.
The numbers are very similar from some of the giant lava flows in Siberia. The amount of carbon dioxide they release is very similar to the sort of fossil fuel burning carbon dioxide release that we're doing sort of decade after decade today.
Studies point to climate disruption as a driving force in most of Earth's mass extinction events. We cannot argue against the brute reality of what has already happened before. At this point, we enter a realm when psychological defenses are activated, when barriers in our minds seem to prevent us from fully grasping that such a horrendous fate is looming over humanity. It is also the point where almost all programs on the climate crisis stop. The level of devastation that could be inflicted by a climate catastrophe has often been compared to a nuclear holocaust. As we're talking about a threat to the very existence of life, it is impossible to ignore the colossal moral questions that present themselves.
I have a dream today. I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
One of the great moral prophets of the past century was the impassioned civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King. In this quote, he's referring to nuclear war. But if he had lived long enough, one can be sure he would have issued the same profound warning regarding the danger of a climate holocaust.
We are now faced with the fact, my friends, that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. We may cry out desperately for time to pause in her passage. Time is adamant to every plea and rushes on over the bleached bones and jumbled residues of numerous civilizations, written the pathetic words too late. We must choose in this crucial moment of human history.
Now the harmful consequences have not only spread across the Earth, but reach into the atmosphere itself to cause the ultimate disruption. While recognizing this moral crisis, one must also look for a way out of darkness. The IPCC report says that to avoid catastrophic consequences, there must be a transformation of our society at a speed and scale that has, quote, no documented historical precedent.
Research posted in the journal Science says planting billions of trees could remove nearly 25% of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
While it is not the purpose of this program to provide a political blueprint for how to achieve this, it is clear that for humanity to have even a fighting chance, there must be people in leadership positions who recognize the emergency we are in, rather than people actively promoting the continued use of Earth-threatening fossil fuels.
We're going to cancel the Paris Climate Agreement and stop. Unbelievable. And stop all payments of the United States tax dollars to UN global warming programs.
In the 2016 presidential election, the swing state of Michigan was decided by an incredibly tiny 0.3% of the vote, the extremely small number of 10,704. Another swing state, Wisconsin, was decided by only 1%. If the climate movement had mobilized and sent its most skilled activists to such critical areas to fully convey to swing voters the extremeness of the position held by one of the candidates, some believe these incredibly small margins of difference might have been reversed, and an electoral disaster could have been avoided. Tragically, such a mobilization did not happen. as we look ahead to the most important presidential election in American history. One can only hope that a drastic lesson was learned.
I'm not a big believer in man-made climate
Trump
change.
has now signed orders saying construction can resume.
30% decrease in the EPA. Trump administration orders a media blackout.
All who see the danger must now become fully mobilized. As the hoofbeats and tipping points of apocalypse thrust themselves into view, this may well be the last opportunity to alter the fate of not only our nation, but the planet. The eyes of the world will be watching.
But to change the rules now and say we're going to do it differently after we had all agreed on the terms of engagement, then I need to go back to a number of organizations who said, I want debate on my issue and my issue only. And we don't have enough debates to do that.
If we go to a 3 or 4 degree temperature rise, which is where our current level of ambition or current level of policy around the world would take us, I think there's actually a high probability that we would have crossed that threshold and be on the pathway to hot house Earth.
Climate change has happened. Climate catastrophe is a reality. We are dying.
And I understand the importance of the issue. But to change the rules now...
And all that will remain of our political leaders' legacy will be the greatest failure of human history. And they will be remembered as the greatest villains of all time.
And we don't have enough debates to do that.
Geologists and climatologists are finding that a rapid climate event is happening right before our eyes. Now consider this. Unthinkable and terrifying as it may seem, nearly all life on Earth could go extinct.
I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And then I want you to act. I want you to act as if you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if the house was on fire. Because it is.
We rallied today. There were hundreds and hundreds of young people that streamed in. Locally, there were dozens of support events that happened across the country and all over the world, actually, of other youth standing in solidarity with the work that we're doing right here around this lawsuit.
Change is coming. We are few, but we are strong. Time's been wasted, and we haven't got too long. Mothers dying, we can feel it in our bones. So we're rebelling on a system that is wrong.
Don't want to be afraid, hard not to hesitate, but we can't wait to be the change. It's not too late, free from hate. Think of the future that we could create. Face the facts today. There's a better way.
We're gonna rise like water. We're gonna face this crisis now. I hear the voice of my great granddaughter saying, keep it in the ground. Let's go.
We need to wake up. We need to wise up. We need to open our eyes and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future. And we need to start right now. We're on a planet that has a problem. We've got to solve it, get involved and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future. And we need to start right now.
It's a wonderful moment, y'all. It's a beautiful thing.
Teach adults how to cool the world.